WNBA Free Agency is upon us, and Em Adler is here to talk all about it, from the next free agency predictions to what's happened so far and their predictions for what's left to come. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Hello and happy Friday. You are locked on to women's basketball. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If this is your first time listening, welcome. We at The Next have over 100 reported pieces every single month. We have a beat reporter on every single WNBA team, one on more than 15 different NCAA beats. So get that YouTube subscription up, and you can also support us by subscribing to The Next, $9 a month, $72 a year at thenexthoops.com. Today, we'll be talking all about the Next's free agency predictions, what's happened so far, Em's predictions for what's left to come, and more. Joining me today is the Em Adler, who covers the WNBA and college basketball for us, focusing on player development and the game behind the game. Before I get into the Next's free agency predictions, what are some of the biggest questions entering this free agency period?
I think the biggest thing is just that there are some teams that are at pretty major inflection points, either trying to build off of last year or trying to make a hard pivot. When we've seen players, unexpectedly leave or maybe break out or regress in ways that weren't expected. So, take the Washington Mystics, for example. Elena Delle Donne, I should say somewhat unexpectedly, asked for, maybe didn't ask for, but indicated that she would be leaving in free agency. This has resulted in what's going to be the second sign-and trade of her career. But, that means the Mystics right now are at a position where they have to do sort of a hard pivot and figure out, what direction do they want to go in for next year. You still have Ariel Atkins under contract. You still have, obviously, Shakira Austin, a budding superstar. And you have so many pieces already locked in place, so many solid pieces. But you were already basically another star short of really being in the Vegas, New York tier. And now with Elena Delle Donne, how do you want to pivot? Do you want a short-term retool? Do you want to just take it like Seattle took it last year and really just go gung-ho anyway? And I think you're in a similar position with Chicago bringing in new management, a new coach. They have a lot of contracts and a lot of money under already committed for this year. How do they want to approach that? Because it's basically, a good outline of a roster. How do you want to approach that? How do you want to fill that in? I think Connecticut's in a pretty similar position to Washington, minus, some of the harder choices. And around the league, I think we're just seeing a lot of teams at very different points in the winning cycle who are all trying to figure out, which direction do they want to go in. And they're all looking at what is a pretty shallow free agent class with very different lenses.
And we'll talk about Elena Delle Donne a little bit more in our next segment. But again, before we dive in, just setting the scene, do you think the unknowns surrounding who's declaring for the draft will impact free agency at all?
I think it's a little tricky for some teams that are at positions where, you know what you're picking for. It's a little more likely that is playing a case. So Indiana, for example. Indiana, if they didn't get the number one overall pick in this class, they would probably be looking for a backup point guard in free agency, although I doubt that they would really be going gung-ho on that. You could still start Erica Wheeler, have Grace Berger at the backup point guard, or maybe start and take over for Wheeler at some point. I don't think that's where they want to be in terms of, again, progressing on the winning cycle, given the progress they made last year. But it's still an option that you have. There are some point guards available on the market that teams are really going for, and that would definitely be upgrades for them. But when you have a very strong chance of adding Caitlin Clark in the draft, I think given the other youth that they're trying to develop on that team, given their timeline, you look at the free agency and you say, we don't really need to spend a max on our on our books for Natasha Cloud if, there's like significant competition and you're going to have to give up a lot to get there. You don't need to give up, let's say, multiple picks. I don't know actually what is going to be the result of the sign and trade for Jordan Canada, but you don't need to give up, let's say, multiple picks if possible for Jordan Canada. If again, you have one pick that's going to turn into a franchise changing point guard. For Los Angeles, I think before the past few days, it was possible that we said, it would make sense for them not to go after a lot of front court names because it's decently confident that they're probably going to add Cameron Brink. But with Nneka leaving, I think, you still have some openings there, especially as we've seen hints of Shanae retiring. But beyond that, having talked to some people around the league, for the most part, the way you approach it is, you try to add what you can in free agency and try to address your needs. And you try to, when you hit the draft, you get the best players available and really bring them into your system and make what you can of that. I think the best teams do try to keep that separate, unless, again, you're in that position that Indiana is or Los Angeles is, where, rookie talent is, if rookie talent is really impactful, that's always a plus. But I think the best teams go into the draft being able to fill out their roster with promising young players that they can develop and that they believe in, but ones that they're not going to overly rely on to fill certain positions just because, you want to be able to keep those tracks separate. You want to be able to develop your young players without really having to foist upon them those big expectations and those needs to fill roles, or else, things fall apart.
And if you want more on, Nneka Ogwumike, listen to yesterday's episode with Gigi Spear and Aya Abdeen. So negotiations for contracts and the signing of qualifying offers started this week. Let's start off with the next free agency predictions. I've had you on to talk about our in-season predictions before, so can you just explain how you set up the free agency predictions this year?
Yeah. So as usual, I reach out to all our staff via our back-end channels. I share some links to a Google form, and then after people fill it out, I put it into some giant code that I took 14 hours a year or two ago to write, and that now makes my job only take 20 minutes. Basically, I have, for the past couple of years, when it comes to free agency predictions, I have endlessly tortured our staff by asking them to respond to basically every single free agent available. And this year I decided that was probably a little bit much. And I cut it down about halfway, took the top, let's say like 25 unrestricted free agents. There's only a couple restricted free agents that are actually interesting, so included them as well. And, just ask people to predict where each of those players is going to end up. And then just predict their contract as well. I generally, because that can sound kind of daunting, that's a lot of contracts. It's a lot easier for people if you just sort of spitball off the top of your head as to what the contract's going to be. Don't think too hard about it. The thing I think, that makes that pretty successful, I think, and it skews pretty close to what the actual results end up being among our staff, is that, we spent enough time in this space. We spent enough time sort of looking at the teams we cover, looking at teams around the league and looking at their cap situations, covering contracts and all these sorts of things, that we have a very good sense just off the cuff of what the results are going to be when we, not the results, but like sort of what a player's market is probably going to look like, just sort of off the cuff. And I think that lends itself to not only being very accurate, painting at least sort of like a decent picture of expectations in the aggregate when you take a dozen of us and put them together, but it also means that hopefully it doesn't take a lot of time if people don't overthink it.
Were the results of our predictions what you were expecting?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I have often been, and I think everyone has their chance to be either the highest or the lowest on someone, the longest or the shortest contract on someone. But, for the most part, it always kind of just, the results skew towards, I think, what you would reasonably call like a median expectation. I was a little bit surprised in one place or another. A lot of people didn't think, let's see, I was surprised by how much money and length I think people predicted for Diamond DeShields. The median contract prediction was about the exact same as Rebecca Allen or Elena Smith. that was a little bit surprising to me, just given the recent track record in both in terms of injury and production when healthy. I think I was a little bit surprised that a few people don't know that Gabby Williams is almost certainly sitting the season out. But I think other than that, most things around here just kind of make sense. It's hard to look at much of this, and unless you're at one end of the spectrum or another, to really look at it and say, well, that's totally out of left field. And I think that's the nice thing about it.
Awesome. Coming up next, we'll continue talking about the next free agency predictions and what we've learned about free agency so far. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. I've got my eye on the Memphis Grizzlies' G.G. Jackson. Memphis needs shot creation, and Jackson can do it. He's shown flashes, including recording at least 10 points in 3 of his last 5 games and 17 on Wednesday night. Managers should be looking to grab him to see how Memphis continues to use him. I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does tonight against the Orlando Magic and later on this week against the Indiana Pacers, Sacramento Kings, and Cleveland Cavaliers. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. I am not a car person. Recently, I forgot the last time I replaced my tires and thought they needed to be replaced when they were in fact only 2 years old. As it turned out though, my brakes did need to be replaced. But that's where eBay Motors comes in to save me and make handling all of my car repairs easy. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, a roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day, the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So going back to where we left off, were you surprised by the number of contracts going longer than 2 years? It was something that Jackie and Alex talked about a couple of weeks ago in terms of their predictions.
When you say surprised by the number, do you mean what happened last year in the offseason or the predictions in this offseason?
The predictions in this offseason because of what is coming up and what might make a 3-year contract a little bit more unusual.
Yeah, so I was not surprised, but I was still impressed by the fact that there were no median predictions among our staff that were longer than two years. I think last year we had a few that hit 3 years. But I think for the most part, the nice thing about being at the Next and the nice thing about having a space that's dedicated to covering, all around the league and at all levels of women's basketball is that we're really connected with each other, and we're all sort of we're all in the same spaces, and we all, whether you're covering the Big Ten and you're maybe not in the Slack as regularly, or you're covering, let's say, the Bay Area expansion, you're constantly in the Slack looking for updates. Either way, you're getting exposed at least a little bit to what the rest of us are sort of talking about, or what really anyone in this space is talking about and sharing. And what that means is it's really hard to avoid talk about the CBA, opting out after 2025, and the fact that, players just aren't signing longer than that. We saw what happened after the last CBA change, which was you had the max level salary basically almost double. And as a result, you had a lot of players who were on contracts that maybe ran past and into the new CBA, Sylvia Towles, for example, where suddenly, if you were just joining the league and you were looking at the salary cap versus what like Sil was being paid, it would be very strange to see her salary level in with respect to the max. And I think there's very few players who are going to go out and be signing 3 or 4 year contracts, if any at all. And I think part of that is, and I think part of having a couple responses is, sometimes, and this is true for really every workspace, when you have a deadline on some things that really need responses, sometimes you go around and you bug people individually, and sometimes you make compromises with filling it out pretty quickly and you don't think about things. So, I will say there was at least one person who I expected would only guess 1 or 2 year contracts, and for some reason they predicted a bunch of 3 or 4 years. And if it wasn't like already past the deadline that I was hoping for, I would have reached out to them and been like, "Hey, you sleepy?" But that's not what happened, so I let it ride.
And can you just quickly clarify, why we're expecting a lot of 1 or 2 year contracts?
Right. So like I said, in terms of the CBA having an opt-out after 2025, I believe it would naturally expire after 27. But given the position the league is in terms of negotiating a new just overall media rights contract with various channels, and how that links to the ability to greatly increase the salary cap, greatly increase player salaries, and possibly change revenue distribution, that is why you would take a CBA opt-out. Not taking a CBA opt-out after 2025 means that basically you are keeping the same levels of revenue distribution, and you're keeping the same cap, and you're keeping the same salaries for another couple of years, even if the WNBA, as expected, negotiates an enormous new media rights deal, which basically means that you're letting a lot of money come in and flow for 2 years right to the owners' pockets, and you can't see any of it. So if you take a 4-year contract, you are locked in on what is certainly going to be a contract that is a significantly lower percentage of the cap in years 3 and or 4 than it was in 1 or 2.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. And moving on to what we've learned so far, our own Jackie Powell, reported that Jonquel Jones wants to be back in New York. As we've talked about earlier, both Jordan Canada and Nneka Ogwumike are looking to leave the Sparks. What goes into all of that, and was that something you were expecting?
Kind of. I think it was pretty clear coming into free agency that Jonquel wanted to be back in New York, just given the reasons she went to New York in the first place, how the season went, how she was feeling throughout the season. I think Jackie would be one of the first people to tell you that. And in terms of that, relationship, it was clear on New York side that they wanted to get a re-signing with Jonquel Jones done as like item 1B. 1A is coring Stewie, both for their own sake in terms of guaranteeing that she'd be around, but also, Stewie was going to re-sign in New York the whole time. And it is hard to imagine that part of the negotiations that took place between New York and Stewie before she re-signed for 1 year in Seattle back in 2022. It's hard to imagine that part of those negotiations weren't, hey, when you get here on a 1 year contract, we'll immediately core you so we get that out of the way. Or at least probably she demanded, core me so we get that out of the way and I can't be cored in the future. So she's probably going to sign a 2 year contract, take out both years of the core, take it to the end of the CBA. It's pretty straightforward from there. Jonquel doesn't have the ability to be cored because she was cored back in 2022 by Connecticut. Again, getting a little into the weeds there on that. But, like I said, for New York, this pretty much locks up a lot of their cap, which is good. If you are going to lock up a lot of your cap, hopefully it's on 2 of the 4 when healthy, when everyone's healthy, 2 of the basically 4 best players in the sport pretty easily. And I think, they are going to have to make marginal moves. Jackie has talked about this many times, and I'm certain she has a piece or a podcast coming out soon about this, but they're going to have to make some interesting marginal moves to improve on what they were last year. They're going to get better having another year together, but, perimeter defense is obviously the major difference between them and Vegas.
Who has been cored this offseason, and do you expect them to stay put, or are you expecting to see some sign-in trades?
I'm also glad you asked that because that does remind me that I did not answer about Jordan Canada. So yeah, as far as the core goes, Bree Jones, EDD, Stewie, as I mentioned, and Jordan Canada have all been cored. For Bree, this means almost certainly that she's going to sign a 1-year contract. She could sign a 2-year contract. Don't really know why you do that, because then that sort of extends the core rights to second year. But again, that's into the weeds, not the point. And our CBA guru is probably going to correct me on why it would make sense anyway later when he listens and then DMs me. But as far as EDD and Jordan specifically, this is, if listeners are familiar with the NFL, this is exactly like slap the franchise tag on a player to then do a sign and trade. This is in the NBA, not the same, but sort of close enough to slapping a QO on like a restricted free agent who is definitely going to be signed and traded. Think what we thought would happen with DeAndre Ayton before Phoenix matched a few years ago. It is that situation. So when EDD basically said she was leaving, Washington really needs a way to get back on the timeline that the Ariel Atkins, Brittany Sykes, Shakira Austin, what their talent and their contracts say that Washington really wants to be doing in terms of the contention, the cycle of contention. For Jordan Canada with LA, I think it's about, it's less obvious there, but it's pretty clearly they had a core available. Jordan Canada is someone with a very significant market, given how well she played last year, and also given the dearth of point guards on this market. It's driving up the price of point guards without a doubt. Jordan Canada is probably going to get something approaching a lower max, if not the lower max itself, at least in a sign and trade, as well as what LA gets back. So again, teams are giving up things for that. It's hard to imagine like Tasha Cloud getting much less than a lower max specifically, again, because you have Jordan Canada, you have Skylar Diggins-Smith, who has a very small market by herself. Just really a couple of teams that are probably in the running for her, but we're not certain about that. But, you have those two, you have Natasha Cloud, and then after that you have Courtney Williams, who maybe is a good point guard. We have a 1-year sample size in that one. And then after that, the next tier of point guard is basically Daniel Robinson and Lindsey Allen. And that's about it. If you're looking for a starter level point guard, there's a bunch available in this draft coming up, but those are rookies.
Awesome. And, coming up next, we'll get into Em's personal free agency predictions, and I'm really excited to see where these end up. Today's episode is brought to you by Grammarly. Writing the perfect email can be a challenge, but when it comes to writing, Grammarly is there to support you from start to finish. And now Grammarly helps you do even more. With one click, you can easily brainstorm, rewrite, and reply with suggestions based on your context and goals, so you can improve productivity for you and your teams. I've been using Grammarly since it was a new tool on the market, and it's helped me so much, including on my last story, saving me so much time and giving me more time to watch and cover women's basketball. Need to polish your writing? Grammarly can help paraphrase and rewrite to be more concise instantly. Simply select the text that you want to rewrite and give Grammarly a prompt like improve it or shorten it. Need to draft an important email and don't know where to start? Grammarly has suggestions to jumpstart your writing. The best part is that it's free to use. Start being more productive at work. Go to grammarly.com/podcast to download for free today. That's grammarly.com/podcast. Are you expecting a lot of movement in the next couple of weeks?
Kind of. I mean, things have to move, right? Because that's just how it works. You hit the February 1st. You hit the February 1st date, and that's about when things tend to kind of wrap themselves up. I think it was around the last couple days in January, first week in February, when we really saw what was at that point a surprisingly drawn out process of Stewie's choice, which again ended up sending multiple teams in different directions because of how long that was drawn out, and that subsequently took about a day or so for Sloot to make her decision, and we saw all the sort of ripple effects of that, and then that allowed for agents later down the market to really make the decisions with that. I think part of the thing when it comes to this free agent class is, teams, move on top level free agents and then address their sort of concerns down their list of priorities. So for example, if you're a team in dire need of a point guard, let's say Minnesota, we know really wants a point guard. Minnesota, let's say, is trying to trade for Jordan Canada, or they're trying to currently negotiate with Natasha Cloud, Minnesota is almost certainly not interested in Skylar Diggins-Smith. So you have one of those 2 point guards you're looking for. And if Jordan Canada, let's say, goes to Atlanta and Natasha Cloud signs with Seattle or re-signs with Washington, then Minnesota's going to pivot to, all right, giving low-level starter money to Lindsey Allen, Daniel Robinson. But you're not going to make that move before going through the process of trying to get Jordan or trying to get Natasha Cloud. The thing is, this year compared to last year and the year before, is that there's a lot less options at near the top or mid-level of the market where you're going to, those are going to be moves that you'll make before the top of the market already decides and cascades from there. So we have a bunch of teams, for example, that, and I think it's unique this year specifically, that we have a bunch of teams that are specifically looking for point guards, and some of the top options available are point guards. So it's really holding up specifically like what Seattle can do with its money. They're probably going to, if given the option, they'll sign NECA with whatever and then deal with the consequences of not being able to sign another protected contract after that. But, other than someone like NECA, if they're, considering maybe signing Lasia Clarendon or Courtney Williams, they're not going to do that until they figure out if they can get one of Jordan Canada or Natasha Cloud. And we have a bunch of teams who are basically in the exact same position with wanting point guards and having those top options available in a way that we didn't in years past. We still have a dearth of point guards in this league, but it wasn't quite as bad. And B, you didn't have so many teams specifically held up by that need in particular. And I think part of the other issue is we also just don't have the same level of depth when it comes to that. So you have fewer options for teams when it comes to, maybe pivoting from the top option before the market necessarily completely plays out and then cascades. So you can sort of zig while the rest of the league zags, and you can make moves even when the top options still aren't available. And I think it's sort of pretty clear from, this is one of the reasons I love doing our free agency predictions and being able to project contracts in there. And also part of the thing I do in our offseason matrices is, just take people who know stuff. Jack Maloney at CBS Sports, Sabrina Merchant, Ben Pickman at The Athletic, Kevin Pelton's WARP predictions at ESPN, and just sort of average them out and see what the free agent rankings are. And you can really easily compare them year to year. So, for example, we just found out shortly before jumping on to record that Kalani Brown, very somewhat unsurprisingly, is going to re-sign with the Dallas Wings. She is, on average, the number 14 free agent this year. Last year, the number 14 free agent was Sophie Cunningham. Sophie Cunningham ended up signing a 2-year contract at just over $80,000 a year. Kalani Brown, given A, the minutes available, and B, the cap situation in Dallas, it's hard to see her necessarily signing for a whole lot more than, let's say, the veteran minimum, which for her is great because that's a contract that is not a hardship that she's been working on last year. Well deserved. But even last year, Sophie Cunningham was 14. Beyond her, Kia Nurse and Cindy Whitcomb were basically tied for 19th. They both got about $280,000, $285,000 across their contracts. Tiffany Mitchell was ranked 21st. So was Victoria Vivians, and they were both over $270,000. That's, probably somewhere between 2 and 3 times what Kalani Brown might be getting in this Dallas deal. You go the year before, the 14th ranked free agent in 2022 was Rebecca Allen. Rebecca Allen this year is number 11. Courtney Williams this year is number, I think on average, she's about number 14. 2 years ago, she was number 17. So you can see there are a few marquee free agents that you would sort of expect in a normal year that we are missing this year. And I think it has that effect where teams are funneled into the same names. And so there's more negotiations to happen, and there's also more waiting for teams.
What is your hottest free agency prediction?
The funny thing about staring at these spreadsheets as long as I do is that I just sort of look at where things are going, and I don't really tend to have many takes on my own, at least not since we made our initial predictions. No, I think I think this free agency period is mostly going to end up chalk. I think the most obvious thing that we've sort of been able to learn so far from reading the tea leaves, Dan Padover down in Atlanta wants to address both the big situation and the point guard situation, which I think the big situation you would have sort of expected coming into free agency, they would have felt a little more secure in. I think Las Vegas seems to expect that Candace Parker is definitely going to return and is also not pursuing any real options that would be clear starters over her, which is kind of surprising because it seems that they thought, at least given their interest in Kalani Brown, that Kia Stokes stands an okay chance of leaving. So you'd expect at least them trying to hedge on that. But I think that is where that is. I don't know if saying Candace Parker is going to return to Vegas is much of a hot take. I think beyond that, honestly, it's hard to look at this market and think of any hot takes that come with it, because it's either players who are going to sign for a vet minimum somewhere or kind of looks chalky the rest of the way. I think Courtney Williams can end up surprising people with possibly being on the move and then getting a pretty high salary, just given, again, the point guard market.
Awesome. Well, excited to see, and I'm sure we'll have you on again to talk about, any chaos that occurs in the future. What are you working on next?
So currently we are getting into the real swing of things when it comes to the draft season. So, obviously we do a Saturday pod once every week. So we are constantly sort of talking about that, but it's high time we're going to start talking about individual players and really getting into the swing of things with breaking them down, writing our blurbs, and, getting things really where they need to be for the, God willing, hopefully not 10,000 words, but possibly 10,000 words final board when it comes to that, the first few days, first week in April. So we are really getting into high season there, and it's going to be very involved, a lot of writing over the next couple of weeks for us at the in the scouting crew.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me today, Em. Where can the people find you and your work?
Thank you for having me. So you can find me on Twitter, where I don't try to spend as little time as possible, at Em_Adler. So just my name with an underscore in the middle. You can find me on Blue Sky at Emily Adler .bksy. Whatever, I forget what the thing is, but it's the server almost everyone's on. You can find me, of course, on our website, writing every Sunday morning, writing a bunch of scouting stuff without fail, writing our special projects, and of course you can find me on the Saturday pod with Lincoln and Hunter tomorrow, where we will be getting into our first player profile for the 2024 WNBA draft.
Oh, can't wait for that. And thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel.